So, question, what was the biggest lesson you learned in 2018? What was the biggest lesson? I know that one of the things that I've been learning all year was, let's just say I was getting some constructive feedback from my wife that I was on my phone too much. And so God didn't want me to escape 2018 without learning that lesson. So he, in his sovereign grace, allowed my phone to die last Sunday. And apparently, the week of Christmas is not a good time to have your phone go down because nobody will look at it. I'm getting it looked at today, so I will be saved. But I did learn that I cannot live without my phone. And no, I'm just kidding. I learned that I can live without it. Did that slip out? I learned that I can live without my phone. And so, unfortunately, if you called me this week and left a voicemail, I will get back to you today. I'm not ghosting you. That's not what's going on. What are some lessons you learned in 2018? You know, one of the biggest lessons I really do think that God taught me in 2018 was how God provided for us through that Oak Street building in Fruitport. I'm speaking for myself here. It's something I've learned, God has taught me, but I honestly think that when the thinking, if not all of our thinking, then at least my thinking, I know I'm at least speaking for myself, when my thinking shifted from why Calvary needs a building to why God's ministry through Calvary needs a building, that's when God blessed. I really do. I don't know about you, but like the past 6 years, I've been thinking, yeah, we need a building as a church. We need a building as a church. We need our own space. But it was the moment when we had some congregational meetings and some focus groups on the issue, and we began thinking through methodically, strategically, why is it that God's ministry through Calvary needs a building? It's when literally the same month that became clear to me is the same month I got that phone call from Bethel Baptist Church. God blessed us in that moment that the thinking shifted. Now, I don't necessarily want to equate the gift of the Oak Street the miraculous gift of the Oak Street property. I don't want to equate that to the two miracles we're going to read about today in the Gospel of Mark, both of which Jesus took a small lunch and fed thousands of people. Amazing stories. I don't want to equate the two. I do think there's something miraculous about what's going on with Oak Street, though. And I also don't want to give the impression today that you can get whatever you want from God as long as you say it's for his mission, as long as you say it's for it. You can't manipulate God like that. That's a dangerous game to play. That would be the wrong way to think about it. But I really do think that there's a very real sense in which God has provided miraculously for us as a church family, not because we deserve it, not because we wanted it or needed it, but because he wanted us, he wants us to leverage that property for his mission in that community, for Fruitport and beyond in the greater Muskegon area. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Jesus' provision for his people as they're on his mission. But first, a very, very quick review. This past Christmas season, we've continued our series in the Gospel of Mark, but we've been looking especially at chapters 4 through 8 in the Gospel of Mark, trying to figure out why Jesus came. What was Jesus trying to do when he was alive? What was Jesus trying to do when he was going about teaching and healing? What was he about? What was the point of his life between the manger, which we celebrate at Christmas, and the cross, which we celebrate on Good Friday, and the resurrection, which we celebrate on Easter Sunday? What was Jesus trying to do in between his birth and his death and resurrection? Well, Jesus was a missionary. That's what he was. He lived this full and amazing life on mission for the glory of God and for the good of others. We've been talking about his mission like this, and we need to understand his mission because it ought to become our life mission. Jesus says, follow me. So we're to follow him and take up his very life mission. Here's his life mission. Jesus' life mission was to spread God's kingdom through what he said and what he did. Well, what does this mean for us? The first thing it means for us is we need to be asking ourselves this question. Am I learning from Jesus? Am I opening my ears and my heart to what he's calling me to? Am I learning from him? That's part of our mission as a church, is to learn from Jesus. And the second question we need to be asking ourselves in response to these stories, in response to these accounts from Mark of Jesus' life, the second question we need to ask ourselves is, am I serving the community? That's ultimately what Jesus' life mission amounts to, is serving the community. So are we doing that? Am I serving the community, embarking on Jesus' kingdom mission by what I say and by what I do? It's also part of our mission as a church. Well, throughout Mark 4 through 8, we've learned lots of things about Jesus' mission. Quick review. We learned that Jesus is on a mission to heal physically, spiritually, psychologically, relationally. He's out to heal people. We learned that Jesus is determined to stay on mission despite intense opposition and suffering. We've learned that Jesus is on a mission to reach out to the most unlikely of people. Nobody's off limits. He'll go after anyone and everyone. And we've also learned that Jesus invites even unworthy followers, all of us, his disciples and all of us. He invites unworthy followers into his mission. But we got to learn this one last lesson before we can move on from Mark 4 through 8. And that is this, that Jesus provides what we lack for his mission. To demonstrate this today, we're going to be looking at two stories in Mark. As I already said, these accounts of these miraculous feedings where Jesus takes a lunch and feeds thousands of people from such a small amount of food. In both of these accounts, Jesus is going to miraculously feed thousands. This first one happens in Jewish territory. The second one, as we'll see in a second, happens in Gentile territory. Jesus and his disciples were Jews. And the Jews believed they knew they were God's chosen people, and they believed they were a little bit better than everyone else. The Gentiles, on the other hand, as we'll see in a moment, the Jews kind of looked down on the Gentiles and didn't have as much care and concern or even think of them as part of God's kingdom, but Jesus certainly did. Well, let's dive into that first story. If you want to read with us, it's in your Bibles. If you want to turn to Mark chapter 6, verse 34, be welcome to do so and follow along. That's where the first feeding miracle is. And then we'll look at the second one in Mark chapter 8. The scriptures will be on the screen if you don't have a Bible with you. Mark 6:34 is where we'll start. This, just so you know, just for the sake of context, this feeding miracle happens in Jewish territory. Okay? That's important to keep that in mind. Verse 34 is where we'll start. When Jesus landed on the shore, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. The first thing we need to note when we see this story about Jesus' feeding miracle is that this physical feeding miracle happens in the context of spiritual feeding. Jesus is teaching this crowd. He's instructing them. He's preaching the kind of message he would normally preach and teach. That is, that God's kingdom is coming. This is good news. Repent, turn from your sin, turn to God, believe in him, embrace this good news. And so that was Jesus' primary message. So that's what he's teaching this crowd. He's feeding them spiritually. Submit yourselves to God. He's a good God. This is good news if you would submit yourself to him. But Jesus is going to feed them physically. Verse 35. He says, by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. So after a day's worth of teaching, that's important, keep that in mind, 1 day of teaching. We'll see there's a different time frame in the second story. But 1 day of teaching, the disciples observed, hey, these people are probably getting hungry, Jesus. Let's send them away, give them a little break, send them out on a little errand to go get themselves food because they must be getting hungry. But Jesus won't have it. Jesus challenges instead the disciples to do something about it. Here's what Jesus says in verse 37. But he answered, you give them something to eat. Well, that's a daunting task. You give them something to eat. Think about it like this for a second. Jesus tells his churches, so think about all the local churches in Muskegon. His mandate, his mission for the churches of Muskegon is to make disciples of all people. And not just in Muskegon, but even to the ends of the earth. That is a daunting task. Jesus calls us to something that we clearly are not going to be able to do on our own. And he says to the disciples who are there with this huge crowd, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. So for context, think about it like this. Median income in Muskegon County is like $50,000. Cut that in half, $25,000. Half a year's. The disciples are saying, that would take $25,000 to feed all these people. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? So the disciples here, their response to Jesus invites them to join him in this impossible task to physically feed these people. And the disciples' response is like unbelief. They're resistant. They're not even willing to let themselves get creative with Jesus here and figure out a way. Think about it like this. Jesus is like inviting them into thinking up a miracle. They've seen Jesus do amazing things thus far. And Jesus is saying, why don't you guys help me think this through? How are we going to feed this huge crowd? Well, Jesus, he's invited them in. He's given them a shot. But they've already proven over and over again, we saw from those 3 boat scenes last week, the scenes in the boat with Jesus and the disciples, that they don't really understand who Jesus is. They seriously underestimate who he is, what he's all about, what he's capable of. And this story is no different. They respond basically with sarcasm to Jesus. What are you talking about? How can we do that? Jesus is giving them a shot, but Jesus is going to take charge in the miracle. In verse 38, how many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Verse 39. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s on the green grass, by the way, like a shepherd leading his sheep into the pastures. I love that scene. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. I just have this is a hilarious picture in my mind. We know how the rest of the story unfolds. If you've been to church if maybe grew up in church, you know how the rest of the story unfolds. But I want you to think about being there for when this story unfolded for the first time. You're part of this crowd. You've been listening to Jesus teach for a whole day. And you get word, Jesus is going to feed us. Jesus and the disciples, they're having us sit down in groups. They're getting us ready for a meal. And you look up to Jesus, and he's up on this hill, and he maybe is a little tiny because there's a lot of people, and you're sitting in the back. And you see him, word spreading throughout the crowd. Jesus is going to feed us. Well, let's see how they're going to pull this off. And Jesus lifts up 5 loaves and 2 fish. Think about how small and insignificant that would have seemed. These people are probably thinking, Jesus, like, here you go. Imagine if I brought in like a grilled cheese sandwich. That sounds so good right now, actually. Imagine if I brought in a grilled cheese sandwich, and we have like 250 people, somewhere like that in this room. Imagine if I held that grilled cheese sandwich up, lunchtime, come and get it. You're all thinking, I'm going to get a crumb, if that. And some of you who are germaphobes are like, I'm not touching that thing after everybody else has touched it. Not happening. Think about how crazy this scene would have seemed. It looks like the resources at hand are woefully inadequate. Oh, those of you that know where this story is going, it just gives us chills, doesn't it? I mean, this gets crazy. Halfway through verse 41, Jesus has prayed over the fish and the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Stunning. What was so fast? I mean, there's so many amazing things about this story, right? I mean, think about it. First thing here is the disciples are invited to serve. Jesus is the one who pulls off the miracle. But he invites his disciples to participate in passing out the goods. If you think about it, they're essentially being invited to wait and bus tables. Because they not only have to pass out the food, how how many pieces of bread do you want, how many fish, they have to take orders from everybody. But they also are to collect all the leftovers. Anybody here ever bust a table before? I was a busboy once at a local restaurant, and it was awesome. Little interesting, actually. It's not the most glorious job in the world, but Jesus invites his disciples to, and you know what? For all the flack the disciples get, they hop right to it. They hop right to it, ready to serve, ready to pass out this food. They're participating with Jesus. Even though he's providing all the resources, they're participating with Jesus in this amazing, amazing miracle. And of course, what's stunning about this story, we'll see it again in a second. We'll come back to this. What's stunning about this story is that Jesus does not rule a kingdom of scarcity. It may look that way. 5 loaves and 2 fish. How's that going to work? For 5,000 plus people. How's that going to work? Well, Jesus can make it happen. He rules a kingdom of abundance. Now for that second feeding miracle. This one is presumably in Gentile territory, in the Decapolis. At the end of chapter 7, Jesus had just healed a deaf man who was from the Decapolis. So Jesus and his disciples are likely in Gentile territory. That's how we're supposed to read this story that Mark is giving us. So Mark 8, verse 1 is where we'll be. During those days, so the days Jesus was ministering in the Decapolis, another large crowd gathered. Another large crowd gathered. You catching this? The same thing is happening. Jesus is teaching, and he's healing, and a crowd is gathering. People are coming to him, gathering around him. He's got another large crowd on his hands. This is supposed to, if you're reading the Gospel of Mark straight through, which is what you ought to do, you're going to automatically, it's going to trigger this memory in your mind of what happened in chapter 6. The last time Jesus was with a large crowd, remember what happened? They were hungry, and he fed them miraculously. So it should trigger that same thought. This is going to happen again. Verse 2. Halfway through verse 1. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. Now, these are Gentiles Jesus is likely talking about. I have compassion for these people, not just the Jews, but these people as well. They have already been with me 3 days. You remember how many days Jesus had been teaching the Jewish crowd? 1 day. This crowd had been with Jesus 3 days, listening to his teaching. Jesus is leading some gospel of the kingdom conference here. This is a weekend-long conference, and these people are getting hungry. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. So Jesus is remarking here, he wants to care for the crowd. Same thing as before. He's caring for them spiritually, but he also wants to care for them physically. He cares about how they're doing, how their bodies are. He doesn't just care about their souls, but he cares about their bodies as well. And so as he's calling people to rejoice at what God is doing, at the good news, to repent and turn to him, he's also saying we need to meet these people's physical needs as well. Verse 4. His disciples answered him. This is so great. Jesus sets them up. This is like their makeup exam. They failed the first one. They didn't really get full into Jesus' plan, help them create the idea here, help them come up with this idea to feed all these people. And Jesus is giving them a makeup exam. Jesus says, hey, look, we've got all this hungry crowd here. They've been listening to me teach. They've gathered again, hint, hint. He's inviting them. You know what the disciples, of course, should have said? He said, Jesus, I've got an idea. Do what you did last time. We know you could do it again. Do it again. But his disciples instead, this is how they reply. Verse 4. His disciples answered, where in this remote place, it's a little bit of a dig at Gentiles here, where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? Jesus again challenges them. He says, how many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. And 7, they replied. See, the disciples here, Jesus teased them up. He throws them just a lob here. This is one they can hit out of the park. But the disciples give another sarcastic and frankly unbelieving reply to Jesus' comment, his observation that the people were hungry. And so Jesus takes charge again. How many loaves do you have? Verse 6. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples. Same thing. He asks for God to perform the miracle. He gives thanks. He relies on his Father. He says, God, thank you for this food. And then he starts to pass it out to his disciples. His disciples, he gave them to the disciples and to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Again. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. Once again, Jesus invites the disciples to serve. Everyone eats and is satisfied. There's more than enough. There's leftovers even. But it's not the same story. This is not mere repetition. This story, in fact, is meant to develop, I think, 2 key themes that Mark has been developing throughout this entire section. The first theme is this. The first theme that the story is developing is that Jesus is good news for all people. All people. There's no insider group. There's no one group or type of people that has a leg up when it comes to Jesus. So Mark is developing this idea that Jesus is good news, not only for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. Jesus is, in fact, offering the same services to Gentiles as he was to Jews. And this good news of the kingdom of God, it's not something to be hoarded by any individual, by any group. It's for everyone. The second theme that's being developed here, though, is the failure of the disciples. Here they have this chance. They've already witnessed Jesus' first feeding miracle. And they have this wonderful chance to show that they're learning. And they're starting to understand who Jesus is, but they're not. They fail. They seem to be missing out on who Jesus is, what he's capable of, what he's all about. And I know it's hard to tell from the text here, but there's either one of 2 things, maybe both are going on. The disciples either lack the faith that Jesus can do the miracle again, or they lack the compassion that Jesus would do it for a Gentile crowd. Or maybe both is going on. Maybe they don't fully understand or believe in Jesus yet, as they're saying, and maybe they don't really, they're just still selfish and kind of see the Jews as God, the most important people in the world, God's chosen people, and therefore more important. Maybe they see themselves as more important than the Gentiles, and so they're not able to really embrace Jesus here. But we have a wonderful opportunity, because Mark is writing this to us. The disciples shared their story and their failures so that we can learn from them. So as readers of Mark's gospel, we have the opportunity to succeed where the disciples failed. We have the opportunity to trust Jesus to provide what we might lack as we're on his mission. We have the opportunity to have the compassion on the kinds of people Jesus is calling us to. This miracle then becomes almost a call to followers of Jesus to replicate his kind of service, this trust, this compassion as we go about our business, as we carry out his mission to serve those who many might consider on the outside, even when it seems like we don't have everything we need. Our big idea for today, remember, is Jesus provides what we lack for his mission. Here's the heart of it. Here's the question. Do we want to be blessed by Jesus for our own comfort or for the sake of his kingdom mission? Do we want to be blessed by Jesus and receive his salvation and everything else that comes from that in this life and the next? Do we want to receive that for our own comfort or for his kingdom mission? You see, Jesus lacks nothing. Jesus rules, as I've said, Jesus rules, he does not rule a kingdom of scarcity, he rules a kingdom of abundance. Jesus does not have anxiety when he looks at his budget like we might have at Christmas time when things are tight. Jesus, he doesn't toss his hands up wondering how his people who are on mission, how they're going to be provided for. He's not concerned. He has zero concern. Jesus always has more than enough for his people who are on his mission. You know, earlier I spoke of how God provided a building for us in order to be on his mission in Fruitport and beyond. But the building is just the start of it. That's just a platform. That's just a platform. It's a tool to be used for the glory of God and the good of others. So we as a church, as the Calvary family, we want to serve the community with that facility beginning in 2019. In fact, it's already started in some ways, as some of the students had to gather there yesterday during that evacuation. We want to serve the community with that facility, serve the community. That's part of our mission statement. And I want to unpack a little bit specifically about what that means really quick before we eat the Lord's Supper together. When we say serve the community, we've got three specific things, ideas, concepts in mind, okay? The first thing we're thinking about when we say we want to serve the community as a church family is missional neighboring. Missional neighboring. That is, as we go out in the community, as we scatter as a church family from Monday to Saturday, we spend time living, working, playing in all different parts of town. You know, and maybe earlier I mentioned that God had taught me some big lessons in 2018. But I wonder what lessons he might have taught you. See, God has empowered you. He's taught you lessons so that you might share those lessons with people in your circles, people that you live, work, and play with. Maybe in 2018, maybe your marriage has fallen apart and you're faced with the impossible task of dealing with the heartbreak, the guilt, the shame, and the mess from it all. But here's the thing, Jesus is still there. Jesus is still there. He's providing you grace day by day to be on his mission. Have you been learning to lean on that grace? Maybe you're single but desperately want to be married, and you're facing the impossible task of staying focused on Jesus while having to navigate that crazy, messy world of dating. But Jesus is still there. He's providing you grace day by day to be on his mission. Have you been learning to lean on that grace? Maybe you lost a loved one in 2018 and you're facing the impossible task of moving on. I know it's impossible to move on. The grief is suffocating, the loneliness is unbearable. But Jesus is still there, providing grace day by day to be on his mission. Are you learning to lean on that grace? Maybe somebody hurt you deeply. Someone that you love deeply maybe hurt you, betrayed you in some way. And you have the impossible task of pursuing reconciliation, maybe with somebody who doesn't even think they did anything wrong. But Jesus is still there. He's providing you grace day by day to be on his mission. Have you been learning to lean on that grace? You know, as we each learn from Jesus and support each other, acting like family, we have this opportunity then as individuals scattered throughout the community to represent Jesus wherever we're at. That's what it means to be a neighbor on mission for Jesus. But the last two things we think of when we think about serving the community here at Calvary both have to do with gathering together, doing these things together. The first is hospitality initiatives. We have ongoing programs like the food pantry, or we have events where we invite the community in, like Trick or Treat, or the Easter egg hunt, things like that, where we invite people into the building and invite people into relationship with the hope that we might plant kingdom seeds by what we say and by what we do. Jesus is providing us grace to carry out his mission in those initiatives, and we're trusting he will continue to provide grace going forward. And the third thing we're thinking about is missional partnerships. These are the ongoing partnerships we have with other groups, experts around town, places like Supper House or Muskegon Pregnancy Services, or doing mentoring at Fruitport Community Schools. This is where we will send money or volunteers to, again, plant kingdom seeds by what we say, and by what we do. That's what we're doing here at Calvary. And Jesus is providing us grace for those partnerships, and we're trusting He'll continue to provide. And Jesus provides what we lack for His mission.